arrogance, fraud, and a stunning downfall. Watch how one man's wealth couldn't save him from justice. The chatter in the courtroom buzzed like a hive of restless bees, tension crackled in the air. People packed into the benches. Shoulder to shoulder, their eyes flicked toward the defendant's table. Whispers passed from one mouth to the next, each rumor more scandalous than the last. Then he walked in. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a charcoal gray designer suit, the man carried himself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His slicked-back hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights. He smirked at the crowd as if the room had gathered to admire him, not judge him. Robert Langston, the name that had dominated headlines for weeks, looked more like a guest of honor than a defendant accused of stealing millions from struggling families. But it wasn't his entrance that turned heads, it was what happened next. At the other end of the room, Judge Natalie Carter took her place on the bench. Known for her unwavering commitment to justice and her no-nonsense demeanor, Judge Carter was a force to be reckoned with. As the bailiff called for everyone to rise, the room obeyed everyone. That is, except Robert. His refusal to stand wasn't just a slight, it was a declaration of defiance. What followed was a trial unlike any other, marked by damning evidence, tearful testimonies, and a level of arrogance that left everyone stunned. Robert Langston believed his money and power would shield him from accountability. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that this time, even his fortune couldn't save him. The verdict and what Judge Carter did next would send shockwaves far beyond the courtroom, delivering a message no one would forget. Robert Langston wasn't just rich, he was the kind of wealthy that made headlines. His empire spanned luxury yachts, private jets, and sprawling mansions on both coasts. Known for extravagant parties and an air of invincibility, Robert believed the rules didn't apply to him. His confidence bordered on arrogance, and his entrance into the courtroom reflected that perfectly. Clad in a custom charcoal gray suit and perfectly polished shoes, he strode in as though attending a high-profile gala rather than facing charges of fraud. When Judge Natalie Carter entered and the bailiff instructed the room to stand, Robert remained seated, flipping through a legal pad as if the proceedings were beneath him. His smug grin made it clear he believed the trial was just another hurdle his wealth could easily overcome. Robert Langston's fortune wasn't built on innovation or hard work, but on deception. Through his firm, Langston Capital, he promised small business owners and middle-class families the chance to secure their futures with high-return investments. The reality, however, was far darker. Retirement accounts, college savings, and even family inheritances were funneled into fraudulent schemes. Among his victims was Angela Lopez, a single mother who invested her life savings, only to lose everything when Langston's schemes collapsed. "I thought I was giving my kids a better future," she tearfully explained. "But now we're struggling just to survive." Another victim, Michael Grant, a retired firefighter, had spent decades saving for a peaceful retirement. Instead, he ended up losing his home and living in a spare room at his brother's house. For Robert, these losses were just collateral damage, part of the business he saw as a game he always won. For years, Robert seemed untouchable, evading scrutiny with flashy lawyers and strategic payoffs. But when investigators finally caught up, they uncovered a mountain of evidence: falsified bank records, fraudulent contracts, and damning emails that painted a chilling picture of his crimes. Yet even as the walls closed in, Robert dismissed the accusations with a cavalier attitude. "It's just business," he told reporters outside his mansion. confident his money and influence would shield him once again. Delays, motions, and legal maneuvering stretched the case for months, giving Robert the illusion of control. But as the trial loomed closer, the sheer volume of evidence and the growing anger of his victims ensured this time would be different. For the first time in his life, Robert Langston's wealth couldn't save him from justice. Robert Langston lived a life most people could only dream of. With luxury yachts, sprawling mansions on both coasts, and a fleet of private jets. He was the epitome of extravagance. His business empire, Langston Enterprises, was a household name, synonymous with wealth and power. But beneath the polished exterior was a man whose confidence bordered on arrogance. This was on full display the day he entered the courtroom. Wearing a designer charcoal suit and flashing a smug grin, Robert walked in as though he were a guest of honor, not a defendant. When Judge Natalie Carter entered the room, the bailiff called for everyone to rise. The crowd obeyed except for Robert, who remained seated, nonchalantly flipping through a legal pad, as if the trial were a trivial inconvenience. Robert's empire was built on a foundation of lies. Langston Enterprises had lured thousands of families with promises of secure investments and financial freedom. People trusted him with their life savings, college funds, retirement accounts, even family inheritances. But it was all a scam. Behind the scenes, Robert and his team falsified documents and diverted funds for personal gain. Angela Martinez, a widowed mother of 3, invested everything she had, only to lose her home. Her family spent weeks living in their car. Peter Vaughn, a retired firefighter, had spent decades saving for retirement, only to end up in his brother's spare room. These were just 2 of the countless victims devastated by Robert's greed. For him, it wasn't personal, it was just business. For years, Robert's deception went unnoticed, his wealth shielding him from scrutiny. But investigators eventually uncovered a trail of falsified records and damning emails that painted a clear picture of fraud. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Robert remained dismissive. He publicly stated, "I've got the best lawyers money can buy. This will blow over, it always does." Even as his trial began, he appeared unbothered, treating it as a mere formality. He believed his money, connections, and charm would save him, just as they had before. When Judge Natalie Carter entered the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted. She was a woman of quiet authority, known for her firm but fair approach to justice. Her reputation as a no-nonsense enforcer of the law preceded her. As she approached the bench, the bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Carter." The crowd obeyed immediately except for Robert Langston. His refusal to stand was a silent but brazen act of defiance. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Judge Carter paused, her gaze piercing. But she didn't react outwardly. Instead, she calmly took her seat and began the proceedings. Angela Martinez was one of the first victims to testify. Her voice trembled as she described how Robert's deceit had shattered her family. "I trusted him," she said, clutching a folded piece of paper. "I thought this investment would secure my kids' future. Instead, we lost everything: our home, our dignity." Tears streamed down her face as she recounted nights spent in her car with her children, struggling to find a way forward. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional sniffle from the audience. Peter Vaughn's testimony was equally devastating. The retired firefighter, who had spent decades risking his life to save others, described the betrayal he felt. "I worked hard my whole life, thinking I was securing a future for my family," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. And this man burned it all to the ground without a second thought. As he spoke, the audience shifted uncomfortably, their anger toward Robert palpable. Throughout these testimonies, Robert Langston remained unbothered. He leaned back in his chair, occasionally scrolling through his phone or whispering jokes to his lawyer. His dismissive attitude enraged the victims and spectators alike. On one occasion, during Angela Martinez's emotional testimony, Robert smirked, as if amused by her pain. The prosecutor pointed out his behavior to Judge Carter, who ordered him to put his phone away. Even then, Robert complied with a casual wave, showing no respect for the gravity of the situation. The most damning moment came when the prosecution presented emails that explicitly outlined Robert's fraudulent schemes. In one email, he instructed his team, "Make the numbers look good. We need these suckers to sign on the dotted line." The words hung in the air like a poison, drawing audible gasps from the audience. The prosecutor turned to Robert and asked, "Do you recognize this email?" His lawyer objected, but Judge Carter overruled. Robert leaned into the microphone, his tone dripping with condescension. "Yes, I recognize it. But it's just business talk. You wouldn't understand." The crowd erupted in whispers, silenced only by the judge's gavel. The courtroom was electric with anticipation on the final day of Robert Langston's trial. Victims filled the benches, their faces etched with a mix of anger and hope. Angela Martinez clutched her purse tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. Peter Vaughn sat upright, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the bench where Judge Natalie Carter would soon deliver the verdict. Reporters lined the back rows, their pens poised and cameras ready, knowing this would be a moment to remember. Outside, news vans crowded the courthouse steps, reflecting the national interest in the case. Inside, the silence was deafening as Judge Carter entered the room, her expression unreadable. All eyes were on her, the weight of her decision pressing down on everyone present. Judge Carter's voice was steady and deliberate as she began. "Mr. Langston, you have been found guilty on all counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the testimonies of your victims paint a clear picture of the devastation you caused." She paused, letting her words sink in. Robert leaned back in his chair, his face expressionless, though a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. Judge Carter's tone grew colder. "Throughout this trial, you have shown a blatant lack of remorse. Your arrogance, disrespect for this court, and disregard for your victims' suffering are staggering. Justice is not about wealth, power, or privilege, it is about accountability." She turned her gaze directly at Robert, her next words cutting like a blade. "You will face the consequences of your actions." The room held its breath as Judge Carter declared, "I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, I order the immediate liquidation of your assets to repay the families you defrauded." Gasps echoed through the courtroom, followed by murmurs of disbelief and applause. Angela Martinez covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Peter Vaughn exhaled deeply, his shoulders finally relaxing. Robert shot up from his seat, his face flushed with anger. "You can't do this. I'm Robert Langston, you can't treat me like a common criminal. His voice echoed as the bailiffs moved toward him. Judge Carter remained calm, her gavel striking sharply. This is my courtroom, Mr. Langston. And you will show respect. Bailiffs, remove the defendant. As Robert was escorted out, his protests grew fainter, drowned by the applause that erupted in the courtroom, a rare but fitting response to justice finally being served. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the victims. Angela Martinez, her voice still shaking, said, "I'm relieved. But no sentence will erase the damage he caused. At least now, my family has hope." Peter Vaughn added, "It's not just about the years he's getting. It's about the message: people like him aren't untouchable." In her chambers, Judge Carter quietly reflected. Knowing she had delivered more than a verdict, she had restored faith in justice for countless people. In the quiet of her chambers, Judge Natalie Carter sat by the window, watching the commotion below. Reporters clamored for interviews, and victims gathered in small groups, some smiling through tears. Yet, Judge Carter felt no triumph or personal victory. Her role was never about making headlines, it was about ensuring justice. She had heard every heartbreaking testimony, weighed the overwhelming evidence, and delivered a sentence rooted in fairness, not emotion. For her, the gavel wasn't a symbol of power but of responsibility. Her quiet resolve and commitment to the rule of law made her a beacon of hope for those who believed the justice system could hold even the most powerful accountable. The trial didn't just end with a verdict, it sparked a national conversation. People across the country debated the case, sharing stories of their own struggles with injustice and corruption. News outlets highlighted how the sentence against Robert Langston sent a powerful message: wealth and privilege do not place anyone above the law. One of the most moving outcomes was a letter published in a local newspaper, written by Sophia Martinez, Angela's youngest daughter. In it, she wrote, "Dear Judge Carter, thank you for standing up for my family and countless others who were wronged by Robert Langston. You didn't just give us justice, you gave us hope. You showed us that people like him can't get away with hurting people like us. Because of you, my family believes in fairness again. Thank you for reminding us that the law protects everyone, no matter how small or powerless we feel." Sophia's words resonated deeply, inspiring many to believe in the power of accountability and fairness, even in the face of overwhelming odds. This story of Robert Langston's trial is more than just a courtroom drama, it's a lesson for all of us. Justice isn't something reserved for judges and lawyers, it's a collective responsibility. In our daily lives, we have opportunities to uphold fairness and integrity. Whether it's standing up against wrongdoing, supporting those who've been wronged, or holding ourselves accountable for our actions. Ask yourself, what does accountability mean to you? How can you contribute to creating a fairer society? It might start small, but every action matters. This trial reminds us that no matter how powerful someone may seem, truth and justice can prevail when we fight for them. As the camera pans out on this story, let it leave you with this thought: justice isn't just the responsibility of the courts, it's a value we must all champion in our lives, every single day. Robert Langston's downfall was a stark reminder that no one is above the law. His wealth and arrogance couldn't shield him from accountability. The powerful testimonies of his victims, the mountain of evidence, and Judge Natalie Carter's unwavering resolve ensured justice was served. Langston's 25-year sentence and the liquidation of his assets marked a significant victory. Not just for those he wronged, but for the broader fight against corruption and greed. This story isn't just about one man's trial, it's about the principles that guide us as a society. What does justice mean to you? Is it about fairness, accountability, or standing up for those who can't defend themselves? How can you contribute to creating a world where integrity and honesty prevail over deceit and exploitation? Reflect on these questions and consider your role in upholding the values that make our communities stronger. Justice isn't just about what happens in a courtroom, it's about the choices we make every day. By standing up for what's right and holding ourselves and others accountable, we become part of a larger movement toward fairness. Remember, real change starts with each of us. Together, we can ensure justice is not just an ideal, but a reality for everyone.